All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon. This is Amelia Francis Fincham with your news updates. Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim is expected to speak later today at a press conference. Reporter Maham Hashmi has more.
After 101 days since being elected, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim will be giving his first State of the City address to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. This will be the mayor's first major addressing to the business community, where he will outline City Hall's plans for the next 4 years. Economic recovery will be one of the focuses of the conference. The event takes place at the Fairmont Hotel in Vancouver at 12:30 this afternoon. Maham Hashmi, 1680 The Crow.
An inquest continues today into the suicide of Nicole Chan. The family of the Vancouver police officer says she was in a mental health crisis because of a coworker who was blackmailing her into a sexual relationship. VPD Superintendent Shelley Horn told the inquest that Chan had raised concerns with HR about being coerced into having sex with an officer, but she says the file was being handled by the Human Resources Division where the suspect worked. Horn testified that Chan had told her she was distressed about a screen recording the officer had taken. He then threatened to send the video to Chan's husband. Horn said Chan felt she had no other choice but to have sex with him. A new CCSA guidelines suggest that people should consume no more than 2 alcoholic beverages a week to avoid serious health concerns. Our reporter Mac Fleet reports.
We are in the midst of what many people refer to as Dry January. Couple that with the new revision of the CCSA guidelines, and that could spell trouble for breweries. The process of making non-alcoholic beer is an expensive one that many smaller breweries can't afford to do. As far as the taste goes, Red Arrow Brewmaster Zachary Stumport says the switch to a non-alcoholic beer isn't a jarring one.
What's been invented is essentially a large membrane that you can use to filter your beer, and it filters the alcohol and the water out, and then keeps all the flavor and all the other wonderful byproducts of fermentation and all that in the beer. So we're getting really, really nice, flavorful, non-alcoholic beers that are really authentically beer.
Many microbreweries would like to start brewing non-alcoholic beer, but just can't afford to do so or just don't have the space. Mac Fleet, 1680, The Crow.
And we're joined live now with Mac Fleet. Mac, it doesn't look like you're at a brewery.
Unfortunately not, and besides, I may or may not be at my 2-drink limit for the week.
So what are breweries saying about the new regulations?
Well, I spoke with a few breweries over the past couple of days, and they all echoed the same thing, that they would love to be able to brew more non-alcoholic options, but it's just really pricey, or they don't have the equipment and the space to safely do it.
What do you mean by safely?
Well, one brewery I did speak with mentioned that the alcohol in beer serves as a pasteurizer. You remove that, and then bacteria can start to grow, and then it gets unsafe for the consumer. Larger breweries, such as, Phillips and Central City, have giant pasteurizing equipment that allow them to safely do this process.
Okay, well, thanks for the chat, Mac. Port Moody Police is informing the public of a drowning this past weekend. On Saturday, shortly after 12 p.m. noon, frontline officers responded to a sudden death at Reed Point Marina in Port Moody. A man in his 60s is believed to have accidentally drowned. The death is not considered to be suspicious in any way. The British Columbia Coroner's Service attended the scene and is leading the investigation. Associate Finance Minister Randy Boissonnault says it's going to be a turbulent year for the Canadian economy. The MP spoke to reporters before heading away on a 3-day federal cabinet retreat in Hamilton, Ontario. He says inflation and the war in Ukraine are among the issues for economic harm. A report this week from the Business Council of Canada and law firm Bennett Jones says the Liberal government fiscal forecasts are likely to be too optimistic.
We still have fiscal room to be able to do the things we need to do, but the fiscal room has tightened over the war in Ukraine and the fact that we have made a very clear commitment to Ukraine, but also to Canadians as we get through inflation.
A lab at the University of British Columbia is developing a new drug checking technology, including a tool they claim can detect lower amounts of drug components. The technology is being introduced as BC prepares to make it lawful for individuals to possess tiny amounts of illegal substances by the end of this month. Utilizing a variety of technology, this free confidential service is expected to be provided at venues like music festivals and safe consumption sites. Police in Victoria are urging parents and guardians to be vigilant about their children's online activity. Last year, there was an increase in online sexual extortion in the area targeting teen boys. Police say the perpetrators contact potential victims via social media platforms like Instagram and Snapchat, posing as teen girls looking for a relationship. They request intimate images and then threaten to share publicly unless payment is made. The statement is urging young people to never share intimate images and tell a trusted adult if they're experiencing this kind of behavior. One person has died in an avalanche that caught two snowmobilers over the weekend. Forecasters have warned that this year's snowpack isn't like previous years. Maham Hashmi reports.
BC winter weather conditions continue to worsen as more avalanches across the province cause fatalities. The prolonged cold and dry start to the winter created weak layers in the snowpack across the interior. The recent storm and drastic changes in temperature have destabilized the snowpack, increasing the risk of human-triggered avalanches. Environmental experts project these winter weather conditions to worsen this weekend. Maham Hashmi, 1680 The Crow.
A Kamloops initiated plan to get land trusts more involved in solving the housing crunch in BC has reached a milestone. A petition to the federal government has surpassed the 500 signatures in need in order to have it certified and presented to the House of Commons. The proposal mirrors an existing program that provides tax credit to those who donate land to ecological reserves. A man who dug fossilized dinosaur footprints out of a protected site in Hope has been sentenced to 25 days in jail and handed a $15,000 fine. Provincial Court Judge Darren Reeves says the man and three others used power tools to remove the fossils. Benward Dale Ingram, 39, pleaded guilty to excavating on Crown land, which happened at Six Peaks Dinosaur Track in 2020. The man was charged and expressed remorse for his actions, although the stolen fossilized footprints have not yet been recovered. Survivors of a residential school that housed Métis children in Saskatchewan have filed a proposed class action lawsuit against the federal and provincial governments. They were not included in the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement because the school was determined not to qualify. A memorandum on understanding was signed with Ottawa in 2019, but the group says discussions were not successful. Oscar nominations came in this morning with contenders showing a lot more diversity. Canadian director Sarah Polley was nominated for both Best Picture and Adapted Screenplay for Women Talking.
A big morning for Everything Everywhere All at Once.
What's happening?
The multiverse movie scoring a leading 11 nominations, including 3 acting nods, directing, and the big one, Best Picture, where it's up against 9 other films. Netflix's All Quiet on the Western Front, the only streaming Best Picture nominee, and The Banshees of Inisherin also with 9 nods.
What did you come here for?
The rest of the Best Picture category includes blockbusters Top Gun Maverick, Avatar The Way of Water, and Elvis, Tar, Women Talking, Triangle of Sadness, and Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans. Jason Nathanson, ABC News, Hollywood.
There are new hurdles for Finland and Sweden as they seek to join NATO, with one nation raising the possibility of moving forward without the other. Ines de la Corte reports.
Finland's top diplomat saying Finland may have to join NATO without Sweden. This after Turkey's president warned Sweden not to expect its support for its NATO bid following anti-Islam and pro-Kurdish protests over the weekend outside the Turkish embassy in Stockholm. Finland's foreign minister telling Finnish media, quote, "We still have to evaluate the situation. If it turns out that Sweden's application is stalling for a long time to come," end quote. All 30 NATO member states must unanimously approve any NATO expansion. Inez de la Quatera, ABC News, at the Foreign Desk.
And for our weather, it is a wet day out there today, It is 80% chance of rain. Temperatures are at a plus of 5. And that's it for this news update this afternoon. We'll be right back after this with our sports.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing.
Hi, I'm Amelia Francis Fincham, back now with your sports updates. On Sunday morning, the Canucks management made the announcement to replace head coach Bruce Boudreau. Boudreau took the fall for the underperforming team, but fans are upset with the way the Canucks handled the manner in which Boudreau was let go. For weeks, the identity of his replacement has been called the worst-kept secret in hockey, forcing Boudreau to carry on as a coach while anticipating the end of his Canucks career. Canucks president Jim Rutherford, at the news conference introducing Touchette, apologized.
Unfortunately, it's turned out the way it did. Nobody takes great pride in this. I've known Bruce for a long time. He's been a friend, and I feel very bad about it. And if I've offended anybody in the process, I apologize personally on behalf of the Canucks.
Rick Tocchet, the new coach of the Canucks, deleted his Twitter account in an effort to block out the noise because he wants to create a safe place for the players in the locker room. Tocchet received consistent criticism on Twitter for his political opinions and other social media comments. In addition, fans are making noise about the guilty plea in 2007 for conspiracy and encouraging gambling as a first-time offender, which led to a 2-year probation before an NHL reinstatement. Trust in the team is at an all-time low after the embarrassing departure of head coach Bruce Boudreau and assistant Trent Cull earlier on Sunday. Welcome to the team, Tocchet. Today, the Vancouver Bandits released the dates for their 10 home games at the Langley Event Centre during the 2023 Canadian Elite Basketball League regular season. The squad is prepared to host even larger fans this year after recording their best average and overall attendance in 2022. Seasonal debuts for the Bandits are scheduled for May 27th in Winnipeg against the Sea Bears and June 3rd at home against the Calgary Surge. Fans can sign up to receive any alerts when tickets go on sale. The BC Junior A Lacrosse League drafted featured Luke Neary of Saanich as the top overall pick. The league's 8 teams selected graduating U17 players from the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island during the 6th-round draft, which was held on Saturday in Langley. To compete, the players must be from minor lacrosse associations with no junior program in their catchment area. The rest of the first round was dominated by players from the Ridge Meadows Burrards Minor Lacrosse Association. In soccer, the Kansas City Current have re-signed Captain Desiree Scott for the 2023 season. The 35-year-old from Winnipeg, who has won 186 caps for Canada, returns for her 3rd season with the Current and 7th in the National Women's Soccer League. Named Kansas City captain before the 2022 season, Scott has played in 124 NWSL games and reached the 10,000 played minutes milestone. And that's all for this hour. I'm Amelia Francis Fincham with 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
That music. Do me.
Now it's time for the comment.
The Toronto Raptors have been having a disappointing season, but is it time to embrace a rebuild? The Raptors made the playoffs last year, but are sitting at 21-27 throughout their first 48 games. GM Masai Ujiri needs to commit to a direction for the team, as they have two major players who will be free agents in 2024. Those being Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, both former All-Stars. Pascal and Fred are both extremely talented players, but don't fit the timeline if they are to restructure around young star Scotty Barnes. Their struggles come as somewhat of a surprise, as the roster is mostly the same one that took the Philadelphia 76ers to 6 games in last year's playoffs. They weren't active in the 2022 offseason, with their only significant signing being veteran wing Otto Porter Jr. The main weak spot that should have been addressed was their lack of solid center play. I think the only pathway for the Raptors is to trade Siakam and VanVleet, as their value will only decrease as they approach the end of their contract. The Utah Jazz were a team in a similar situation last year. The Jazz had been a perennial playoff team with their core, but dealt away their 2 stars for significant draft compensation and role players. The Jazz are now 24-25 this year, yet they still have 2 2023 first-round picks to build with. The Raptors could take a similar approach, dealing their 2 highest-paid players to acquire young assets to develop alongside Barnes, as well as stocking up on draft picks. Evan Smith, 1680, The Crow.
It's extremely important for people to stay healthy and to stay active as much as possible.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Hello, podcast people, and welcome to another episode of The Crow Chronicles. I'm Kevin Pontius with my co-host Joseph Augusti. Joseph, what's our topic today?
Our topic today is the relocation of the Vancouver Grizzlies. We are going to dissect what went wrong on the court and off. Kevin, you're an older guy. Do you remember the Grizzlies at all?
First of all, older guy. I mean, I'm still in my 20s here, Joseph. Come on. But no, honestly, I have very few memories of the Grizzlies as a team, and before doing research for this podcast, I really had no idea what happened. Do you have any memories of this team?
I wasn't actually alive. Well, I was, technically, but I was 6 months old when the Grizzlies relocated. And looking back, it just seems ridiculous. The poor drafting, the poor GM, Stu Jackson, who was recommended by NBA Commissioner David Stern, he didn't work out. You look at the Raptors, who got Vince Carter and other high-flying stars, and we're stuck with Bryant Reeves. It just seems ridiculous to me.
I 100% agree. It is completely absurd. But let's take a step back and go through the drafting.
So, one of the main issues playing a role in the Grizzlies being a terrible team was the player drafting. Now, the Grizzlies, along with the Raptors, being an expansion team in '95, were not allowed to get the first pick in the draft for the first 4 seasons. This seems ridiculous, but after the Orlando Magic drafted Shaquille O'Neal in 1992, one of the league's newest expansion teams would make it in the playoffs in his 2nd season, and eventually all the way to the finals in his 3rd season.
But don't just take it from us. Let's check in with someone who was actually there. Here's Vancouver Grizzlies PA announcer Al Murdoch.
What they looked at, basically they called it like the Shaq, Penny Hardaway rule, because, Orlando didn't have anything, and then all of a sudden, boom, boom, they got Shaq and they got Penny.
Right.
So that being said, there was I think a good reason for the NBA to decide, well, we can't have teams tanking just so they can get the first overall pick, and so that's why they brought it in.
And that makes total sense. But take a look at this stat, Joseph. The Grizzlies won their first 2 games before losing 19 straight. This wasn't even the worst losing streak of that season. They later would lose an astounding 23 games in a row, which ranks 5th worst all time in NBA history. So basically, the expansion restrictions severely hampered their ability to build a competitive team. So when you hear about the Orlando Magic having success after drafting Shaquille O'Neal and then them changing the draft rules for the Canadian expansion, do you think it's fair because of that, because they had so much success in Orlando?
I actually don't, Kevin. Well, you realize that it wasn't like the Magic spawned with the first overall pick. They earned it. They were bad. How do you expect teams to get better if they're not drafting high? The Grizzlies, of course, because in the expansion draft, you're only taking players that other teams don't want. It's really, really hard to be a good team just building out of the expansion draft. Every good team in the history has had high draft picks, pretty much. So if you're not getting high draft picks, how do you expect them to get better? What a ridiculous process. I don't think for a second that if it was 2 American teams, it would have had the same situation. But that's just me with my tinfoil hat.
That's an interesting take. I asked TSN legend and Grizzlies sideline reporter Rod Black the same question. Rod, take it away.
I think they learned a lot from last time. I don't think they will let that happen. No, and I honestly, again, it's easy to go the anti-Canadian route on that and say, oh no, never happened in the States. I just think they did it. They did it last time because they were all afraid of the competitive inequities, and because also the NBA's rosters are only like 15 players deep, right? So, yet there are tons of players. I just think at that time they didn't want an expansion team to do well. All the owners, they kind of voted it, and David of course worked for the owners, right? So, yeah, it won't happen again. But I don't think it's because they're American. I just think it's because they learned from last time.
Now, Kevin, one of the most underrated aspects, in my opinion, of the Grizzlies' demise was the poor Canadian dollar. Even back then, it was in the high 60 cents and low 70 cents. That's not good when you're paying your players in American dollars. Former Grizzlies intercom announcer Al Murdoch speaks to this and its impact.
Well, I think there were various reasons why the Grizzlies left town. I think one of the biggest ones was that, for sure. I mean, when you've got a dollar that's below 70 cents to the American dollar, and you're paying all your players, you're paying some of the management team in American dollars, and you're only taking in Canadian revenue, and then you have kind of the start and the record that our team had over the 6 years that they were here.
So obviously the Canadian dollar, taxes, and other financial incentives hurt the team, but it's impossible to forget about general manager Stu Jackson's draft blunders. Back to Rod.
I like Stu Jackson, but I just don't think he was, I don't think they built a team properly then. I really don't. Yeah. And from the day they drafted Big Country Reeves, I love the guy. Nice guy. Mm-hmm. And having said that, like years later, does it really matter? But, you want to sell the game, and they didn't really have to at the time because they were getting fans anyway. But if you want to sell the game, you got to go for this. Again, yeah, sure. Look who was in the draft that year.
Look who is in the draft that year, and the years beyond. Now, I know this is revisionist history, but the Grizzlies' poor scouting is one of the most soul-crushing things for a Vancouver sports fan to reflect on. Joseph, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely, Kevin. So, the Grizzlies took, with their top 10 picks in their first couple of years, Bryant Reeves, Sharif Abdur-Rahim, Steve Francis, and Mike Bibby. Here are some of the players they could have taken. First, Kobe Bryant. Second, Steve Nash. Third, Kevin Garnett. 4, Dirk Nowitzki. 5, Vince Carter. And 6, Paul Pierce. Those are 6 Hall of Famers. I know Vince technically isn't in yet, but he will. Just think of how different the trajectory of the team would have been had they had a competent scouting staff from the very beginning. But forget the players. That's living in the past. Stu Jackson never should have got the job in the first place.
So do you think the only reason Stu Jackson got his job is because of nepotism?
Not necessarily, because they're not well related. It was just a bad recommendation. That happens all the time in every workplace on earth. No one's well, I am blaming David Stern. I mean, it's nothing personal, but this was David Stern's fault at the end for handing the Grizzlies a poor executive. You look at all the teams, everyone's got a Phil Jackson or a Jerry Krause or a Rob Pelinka, if you want to go that far, or a Masai Ujiri, to use a certain term. But it all starts up top. If the chicken is bad, so are the eggs.
Never heard that one.
I just made it up.
The chicken is, I'm using that for sure.
Right. And we're back. Sorry about that. Let's throw back to Rod to finish up the ownership and David Stern narrative.
Right.
And, to this day, I would argue, and God rest his soul, I love David Stern. He was a man with great vision, and he wanted it to work. He wanted it to work in Canada. He wanted Vancouver to remain, but it just wasn't going to do it. And one thing they do is, if it's not working right away, they pull.
Right.
So they pulled, and they brought that ownership to Memphis, which they had a strong group. But
right.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there are no Grizzlies in Memphis.
Before we get to our final point, Rod's right. There's no Grizzlies in Memphis. Joseph, do you think Memphis should have changed their name?
Absolutely, Kevin. There are no Grizzlies in Memphis. It just doesn't make sense. But on a more tangible level, the Memphis franchise should have just completely broken from the Vancouver franchise. The Vancouver franchise had no success whatsoever. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to continue with what is, in my opinion, a losing culture.
Fair enough. So we've touched on the horrendous expansion draft restrictions, the lack of players wanting to play north of the border, ownership, and poor draft selections. Joseph, did we miss anything?
Kevin, there's one more thing we haven't touched upon, and that is the selection of Steve Francis.
With the second pick in the 1999 NBA draft, the Vancouver Grizzlies select Steve Francis from the University of Maryland.
Steve Francis was a high-level point guard coming out of college. That's good. The problem was the Grizzlies already had previously selected Mike Bibby second overall. So now with the Grizzlies having the second overall pick yet again, they decided to take Steve Francis. Not a problem, right? You normally want to go best player available. The problem was Steve Francis had already stated publicly that he did not want to play for Vancouver under any circumstances. He wanted to play for his hometown Chicago Bulls. But the Grizzlies selected him anyway. So the key was, can they convince him to stay there? The answer actually was yes. So Steve Francis decided that he was going to give it a go in Vancouver. He visited the city and he went, to the Vancouver airport, YVR. But that's where things started to go south. A woman saw Steve Francis and his friends and assumed that they were a part of a rap group. That was it for Steve Francis. He never went into Vancouver again as a player. He refused to play there, and the Grizzlies had to deal him from a position of weakness. So they traded him away, and that was a wasted draft pick. There was plenty of other players they could have taken, but that is a self-inflicted wound by a team that could not afford a failure at the draft day table. Getting beyond him not wanting to play there, they shouldn't have taken him because they already had Mike Bibby. Steve Francis, in my opinion, is the definition of all that went wrong in Vancouver. Poor drafting, player reluctance, and short-sighted thinking overall.
So that pretty much sums it up. Now before we wrap it up, let's get two different perspectives on the future of Vancouver basketball. First, here's Al Murdoch.
And again, first off, the NBA is not interested in expansion right now.
Yes.
And I can't imagine that they would be interested in expansion, at least another 5 years, maybe longer. They took a shot at Vancouver before, as David Stern, the late David Stern, the ex-commissioner, would say, it's one of the biggest disappointments as as being the commissioner is having Vancouver fail. But that being said, you need somebody with $1 billion to be able to get a new team.
Oh yeah.
So, and again, $1 billion, and you're in Canada, and again, our dollar is hovering around 72, 73 right now.
Yes.
there was a time over the last decade or so where it was maybe not a decade, but where it was at par. But I don't know if we'll ever see those times again. So you've got to have a guy with massively deep pockets, or an organization or a group of people with deep pockets to be able to even have a shot at even getting a franchise, let alone trying to make it successful in Canada. So if you're asking me whether or not we're going to get another team in my lifetime, I highly doubt it.
Well, that's kind of depressing. But thank you anyways, Al. Rod Black has a different point of view. Take it away, Rod.
By the way, I still believe that Vancouver could get an NBA franchise. The market's still there. You just need those days of ownership. Look at the owners of the Raptors at the time, the Slates and the Bitovs. I mean, you had to be just a $100 millionaire, right? And you could own a team and have a piece, and it would be fun. You have to be a billionaire plus now.
Yeah.
Look at Eugene, again, the late Eugene Melnyk in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Why, they struggled as well. Eugene Melnyk wasn't a billionaire.
Right.
That's what it is. All of any singular ownership or ownership entities have got to be part of a large corporation.
So maybe one day, if someone has deep enough pockets, Vancouver basketball will return once again. For Kevin Pontius, I'm Joseph Augusti. Be sure to check out the other episodes of the Crow Chronicles, as well as our social media at BCIT Journalism on Twitter and at BCIT News for Facebook and Instagram. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a great day.